Meet Sarah Matthews, a dedicated nurse who's about to lose everything for doing what she believes is right. When a wealthy patient suffers a severe stroke, she stays hours past her shift to monitor his condition, breaking hospital rules and refusing any extra pay. The next morning, she's fired on the spot. But fate has other plans. The businessman wakes up and learns of her sacrifice. Instead of staying silent, he searches for her, determined to repay her kindness. Together, they embark on a mission to build free medical clinics across the country, touching countless lives. What happens when compassion meets opportunity? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Metro General's 7th floor buzzed overhead as Sarah Matthews adjusted her worn name badge, the plastic edges smooth from 15 years of dedicated service. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and laugh lines crinkled around her eyes as she reviewed patient charts at the nurses' station. The night shift was her sanctuary, a quiet space where she could focus entirely on her patients without the daytime bustle of administrators and visiting families. Mrs. Peterson's blood pressure is finally stabilizing. Jenny, the fresh-faced nurse who'd started last month, reported with evident relief. "You were right about adjusting her medication timing." Sarah nodded, her experienced eyes scanning the monitors through the glass walls of the ICU. "Sometimes it's not about changing what we give them, but when we give it. You'll develop that instinct with time." Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from her daughter Emma. "Made dinner. Studying. For tomorrow's calc test. Love you, Mom." Sarah smiled, her heart warming even as guilt tugged at her conscience. Another evening of her 16-year-old eating alone, managing homework without help. But the night shift paid better, and with college applications looming, every extra dollar mattered. "Sarah, got a minute?" Linda, the charge nurse, approached with a stack of papers. Her face carried the weary expression Sarah had come to recognize as budget-related stress. "Administration's cutting hours again. They want us to reduce overlap between shifts." Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd been fighting this battle for months now. The endless push to do more with less, to stretch themselves thinner while maintaining the same level of care. "That's dangerous, Linda. You know how critical handoff communication is." "I know." Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. "But it's happening whether we like it or not. They're saying it's this or layoffs." The conversation was interrupted by the sharp ping of the elevator. Emergency personnel burst through the doors, pushing a gurney with practiced urgency. "Stroke alert! Coming through!" Male, mid-60s, found unconscious in his office. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She fell into step alongside the gurney, noting the patient's grey pallor and the expensive cut of his suit, now rumpled and stained. "BP 180-100, patient unresponsive but breathing spontaneously," the paramedic rattled off. "Last known normal approximately 40 minutes ago." They wheeled him into room 742, and Sarah's world narrowed to the immediate needs of her new patient. She moved with practiced efficiency, establishing IV access, connecting monitors, drawing blood for urgent labs. The man's personal effects were placed in a clear hospital bag, a leather wallet, keys to what looked like a luxury car, and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing with incoming messages. Dr. Reynolds arrived moments later, already reviewing the CT scan results on his tablet. "Large vessel occlusion. We need to start TPA immediately if he's eligible." He looked at Sarah. "Family contacted." "Working on it." She'd found his ID, Richard Thompson, CEO of Thompson Healthcare Solutions. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here was a man who owned private hospitals, now dependent on the care of an understaffed public one. As she administered the clot-busting medication, Sarah studied his face. Despite his unconscious state, there was something dignified about him, something that spoke of a life spent in command. His hand bore a worn wedding ring, and smile lines around his mouth suggested he'd laughed often. Not just another rich businessman, she reminded herself. A human being, someone's husband, maybe someone's father. The next few hours were a blur of monitoring, medication adjustments, and documentation. Sarah barely noticed when her regular shift ended at 11 p.m. She was too focused on Mr. Thompson's slightly irregular heart rhythm, the subtle changes in his breathing pattern that years of experience told her needed careful watching. "Sarah, you should head home," Jenny said gently. "Night shift is covered." But Sarah hesitated, her eyes fixed on the monitors. Something wasn't quite right. The numbers were all within acceptable ranges, but her instincts were screaming. 15 years of nursing had taught her to trust those instincts. "I'll stay a bit longer," she said. "Just want to make sure he's stable." Jenny's eyes widened. "But you're already over hours this week. You know what admin said about unauthorized overtime." Sarah did know. The memo had been clear. No unapproved. Overtime, no exceptions. The hospital was cracking down hard on budget overages, but as she watched Mr. Thompson's oxygen saturation flutter slightly, she made her choice. "Go ahead and clock me out," she said quietly. "I'll stay on my own time." "Sarah, it's fine," she managed a smile. "Sometimes we have to do what's right, not what's allowed." As Jenny reluctantly left, Sarah settled into the chair by Mr. Thompson's bed, her tired eyes fixed on the monitors. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and somewhere out there, her daughter was probably falling asleep over her calculus textbook. Sarah sent up a silent prayer for her patient, for her daughter, for all the impossible choices that led to this moment. She didn't know it yet, but this night would change everything. Sometimes the biggest turning points come disguised as ordinary moments of conscience, small decisions that ripple outward into waves of transformation. For now, though, she simply watched and waited, guided by the quiet certainty that this was exactly where she needed to be. The hospital policy manual sat like a brick in Sarah's drawer at the nurse's station, its pages worn from years of reference. Section 4.12. Staff members must not remain on premises outside of scheduled hours without explicit administrative approval. The words echoed in her mind as she watched Mr. Thompson's vital signs flutter on the monitor. 15 a.m. The ICU was eerily quiet, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines and the soft squeak of rubber soles on linoleum as the night shift nurses made their rounds. Sarah's back ached from sitting in the uncomfortable chair, but she didn't dare leave room 742. Something about his latest readings bothered her. Subtle changes that wouldn't trigger any alarms, but set off warning bells in her experienced mind. Her thoughts drifted to another night, 20 years ago, when she'd been on the other side of the hospital bed. Her mother, dying of cancer, had been alone when she took her final breath. Sarah had been stuck in traffic, trying desperately to reach the hospital after her shift at the diner. She'd arrived 10 minutes too late. "I'm so sorry, honey," the night nurse had said. She went peacefully, but peaceful wasn't enough. Alone wasn't acceptable. That night had changed everything, had sent her back to school, had driven her through. Endless nights of studying while working full-time had shaped her into the nurse she'd become. A soft groan from Mr. Thompson snapped her attention back to the present. His blood pressure was creeping up again, and his oxygen saturation was dropping by tiny increments. Most nurses would see these changes as minor, within acceptable ranges. But Sarah had seen this pattern before. She reached for her phone, hesitating for just a moment before dialing Dr. Reynolds's private number. Another violation of protocol. Nurses were supposed to go through proper channels, not call doctors directly in the middle of the night. "Dr. Reynolds, it's Sarah Matthews from ICU." She kept her voice steady, professional. "I'm still with Mr. Thompson, and I'm seeing some concerning changes." There was a pause on the other end. "Sarah, wasn't your shift over hours ago?" "Yes, but..." She detailed the subtle changes she'd observed, the pattern she recognized. I think he might be developing complications from the TPA. She could hear rustling on the other end as the doctor presumably sat up in bed. The changes are all within normal ranges, he noted, stifling a yawn. I know, but something's not right. Call it instinct. Another pause. Longer this time. Dr. Reynolds had worked with Sarah long enough to respect her intuition. Start him on a mannitol drip and get a new CT scan. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Sarah moved quickly, efficiently, years of training guiding her actions. As she hung the new medication, her mind wandered to Emma. Her daughter was so proud of her work, always bragging to friends about her mom, the nurse who saved lives. Would she be as proud if this decision cost them their financial stability? Tibre. CT scan confirmed Sarah's fears. Early signs of cerebral edema, a dangerous swelling of the brain that could have become fatal if left unchecked for a few more hours. Dr. Reynolds studied the images, shaking his head slowly. Good catch, Sarah. This could have been catastrophic by morning shift. He looked at her curiously. But you're going to be in trouble for staying unauthorized. You know that, right? She nodded, watching Mr. Thompson's vital signs begin to stabilize with the new treatment. Some things are worth the risk. As if to underscore the weight of her choice, her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Mom, you okay? It's really late. Sarah typed back quickly. All good, sweetie? Just taking care of someone who needs me. The rest of the night passed in a blur of careful monitoring and small adjustments. Sarah documented everything meticulously in the chart, knowing these records might soon be scrutinized by administrative eyes. Each entry was a potential nail in her professional coffin, but also proof that her presence had been necessary. Around 5 a.m., Mr. Thompson's wife arrived, elegant even in her obvious distress. Sarah briefed her on her husband's condition, carefully, omitting the fact that she'd been there all night without authorization. Mrs. Thompson gripped her hand tightly. Thank you for taking such good care of him, she said, her eyes brimming with tears. Richard is my whole world. Sarah squeezed her hand back, remembering similar words she'd spoken about her own mother. We're doing everything we can. The first rays of dawn were painting the sky in soft pinks and golds when Sarah heard the distinct click of administrative shoes approaching room 742. Linda, the charge nurse, appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of professional concern. Sarah, administration needs to see you immediately. Standing up, Sarah took one last look at her patient, now stable and showing signs of improvement. The policy manual might say she was wrong, but every fiber of her being knew she was right. Sometimes the rules that governed hospitals couldn't account for the human heart that governed healing. As she gathered her things, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. Tired eyes, messy bun, worn badge that had seen her through countless nights like this one. In that moment, she looked remarkably like the night nurse who had been with her mother all those years ago. She hoped that somewhere, somehow, her mother would be proud of the choice she'd made tonight. I'm ready, she told Linda, squaring her shoulders. Whatever came next, she would face it knowing she'd honored both her profession and her conscience. Sometimes the most expensive choices were the ones your heart made for free. The emergency response log lay open on the conference room table, its clinical entries stark under the fluorescent lights. Every intervention Sarah had performed during her unauthorized hours was documented in precise professional detail. Medication, adjustments, vital sign changes, the critical call to Dr. Reynolds. Each line testified to both her competence and her insubordination. Ms. Matthews, Margaret Chen, the hospital administrator, began in a clipped tone. Can you explain why you remained on duty for 6 hours after your shift ended, without authorization? Her finger rested on the log's timestamp. 11:07 p.m. Initial. Observation of subtle vital sign changes. Sarah sat straight in her chair, hands folded in her lap to hide their slight trembling. Mr. Thompson was showing early signs of complications. They were subtle, but in my experience, your experience isn't the issue here. Margaret interrupted, shuffling through a stack of papers. Hospital policy clearly states, with all due respect, Dr. Reynolds interjected from his position by the window. Her experience is exactly the issue. Those complications could have been fatal if left untreated until morning shift. Margaret's lips tightened. Dr. Reynolds, while we appreciate your medical insight, this is a human resources matter. Ms. Matthews violated multiple protocols: unauthorized overtime, direct contact with attending physicians, remaining on premises without approval. I made a medical judgment call, Sarah said quietly but firmly. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sound that had always reminded her of long nights and difficult decisions. Every action I took was in the best interest of my patient. Your patient. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Ms. Matthews, there are procedures in place for shift changes. The night shift was fully staffed. You overstepped your authority and violated clear policies that exist for good reasons. Sarah thought of Emma, probably sitting in first-period calculus right now, unaware that her mother's career was unraveling. She thought of her mortgage payment, due next week, but mostly she thought of her mother, alone in that hospital bed. 20 years ago. Sometimes procedures aren't enough, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Sometimes patients need someone who knows them, who can spot the subtle changes before they become emergencies. That's what nursing is about. Linda, who had been silent until now, cleared her throat. Sarah's one of our best nurses. Her record is spotless. Surely we can... Her record was spotless, Margaret corrected, pulling out another document. But this isn't the first time she's challenged policy. Last month's incident report shows she stayed 30 minutes past shift to help a patient's family navigate insurance paperwork. Sarah remembered that night. A young mother crying over forms she couldn't understand, terrified she couldn't afford her child's treatment. 30 minutes had meant the difference between confusion and clarity, between fear and understanding. The security logs show you accessed the medication room at 2:43 a.m., Margaret continued, well after your authorization had expired. To get the mannitol Dr. Reynolds ordered, Sarah explained. Mr. Thompson's brain was swelling. Minutes mattered. Which brings us to another issue, calling Dr. Reynolds directly instead of going through proper channels. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward. I approved that call. Sarah's judgment was correct, and her actions saved my patient from potentially devastating complications. Margaret held up a hand. Your support is noted, Doctor, but it doesn't change the facts. Ms. Matthews knowingly and repeatedly violated hospital policy. She created potential liability issues. She accessed restricted areas without authorization. She performed medical interventions while technically off-duty. The morning sun was streaming through the windows now, catching dust motes in its beam. Somewhere above them, in room 742, Mr. Thompson was recovering, unaware of the drama unfolding because of his care. If I had followed policy, Sarah said softly, if I had walked away when my shift ended, what would you be discussing in this room right now? A patient's deterioration? Potential legal action from his family? Instead of reprimanding me for staying, maybe we should be asking why our policies make it so hard for dedicated nurses to provide the care our patients deserve. A heavy silence fell over the room. Linda looked down at her hands. Dr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. Even Margaret seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Finally, the administrator spoke, her voice carefully controlled. Your dedication to patient care is admirable, Ms. Matthews, but hospitals cannot function without clear policies and procedures. When staff members decide which rules they will and won't follow, it creates chaos. She pulled out a final document, and Sarah's heart sank. She recognized the format, had seen it delivered to other nurses over the years. Given the severity and repetitive nature of these violations, we have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. 15 years of service, countless lives touched, all ending with a single piece of paper. You'll need to surrender your ID badge and clear out your locker, Margaret continued, her voice softening slightly. We'll pay you through the end of the week, and of course, you'll receive your accumulated vacation time. Sarah reached up to unclip her badge, the plastic warm from her body heat. Her fingers traced the worn edges one last time before placing it on the table. Each scratch and scuff told a story. A life saved, a hand held, a family comforted. "I understand," she said, standing up. Her voice was steady, her back straight, "but I want the record to show that I would make the same choice again, every time." As she walked toward the door, Dr. Reynolds called out, "Sarah, wait!" He scribbled, "Something on a prescription pad. Let me give you a reference. Any hospital would be lucky to have you." But Sarah knew the truth. In today's healthcare system, a termination for policy violations was like a scarlet letter. No hospital would risk hiring her, no matter how justified her actions had been. She stepped out into the hallway, the morning light painting long shadows on the familiar walls. Somewhere above, monitors beeped, phones rang, and nurses went about their duties. The rhythm of the hospital continued, unchanged by the small drama that had just played out in the conference room. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a text. From Emma. "Hope your night went okay, Mom. Love you." Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. She had lost her job, but not her integrity. Sometimes, she reflected, that was the most expensive currency of all. The termination notice crackled softly as Sarah folded it into quarters, tucking it into her purse, alongside 15 years of memories. The contents of her locker fit into a single cardboard box. A spare set of scrubs, comfortable shoes worn, smooth from countless steps, a coffee mug with "World's Best Nurse" written in her daughter's childhood handwriting, and a handful of thank you cards from former patients. "Let me help you with that," Jenny offered, appearing at her side. The younger nurse's eyes were red-rimmed, her usually cheerful face drawn with concern. "I've got it," Sarah replied, managing a small smile. "But thank you for everything." The walk through the hospital corridors felt surreal. She'd traversed these halls thousands of times, but never like this. Never for the last time. Colleagues watched her pass, some offering awkward waves, others quickly averting their eyes. News traveled fast in hospitals, especially bad news. "Sarah, wait!" Linda hurried after her, clutching a piece of paper. "Your final paperwork. I'm so sorry it ended this way." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "Mr. Thompson's doing well. The treatment worked. He's showing signs of consciousness." Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. At least something good had come from all this. The morning sun was harsh. As she stepped outside, its brightness almost mocking. She'd parked her aged Honda in its usual spot just 12 hours ago, confident in her place in the world. Now that confidence lay in pieces, scattered like the autumn leaves skittering across the parking lot, her phone buzzed. Another text from Emma. "In study hall. Can I get pizza for dinner?" Sarah's throat tightened. How would she tell her daughter? Emma was in her junior year, already researching colleges, dreaming of medical school. Their careful financial planning had hinged on Sarah's steady income and benefits. She typed back, "Sure, sweetie, I'll be home early today, early, and tomorrow." And the day after that, the drive home was a blur of familiar streets and unfamiliar thoughts. The termination notice seemed to burn through her purse, its official language echoing in her mind. Immediate termination, violation of policies, unauthorized overtime. No mention of the life saved, the crisis averted, the human element that had driven her decision. Her small house looked different in the morning light. She usually only saw it in the dim evening hours or pre-dawn gloom. The garden Emma had started last spring was blooming with late roses, their persistence a quiet rebellion against the approaching winter. Inside, evidence of her daughter's morning routine was everywhere. A half-empty cereal bowl in the sink, Textbooks scattered on the kitchen table, a post-it note on the fridge with "Good luck on night shift, Mom," written in Emma's looping handwriting. Sarah set her box down on the counter and began the mechanical process of unpacking her career. Each item seemed to carry the weight of memory. The coffee mug, from Emma's third-grade Christmas gift. Exchange, the photo of her nursing school graduation tucked into her locker mirror. The spare stethoscope she'd kept as backup. Her hand brushed against something at the bottom of the box. A small, leather-bound notebook she'd used to track her. Patients' stories over the years. Not their medical histories, those belonged to the hospital. But the human moments. The elderly man who'd told her about meeting his wife in Paris in 1962. The young mother who'd hummed lullabies to her premature twins. The teenager who'd asked her to be there when he told his parents about his diagnosis. She opened it randomly, her eyes falling on an entry from 3 years ago. Sometimes the most important vital sign is the one you can't measure. Hope. The tears she'd been holding back finally broke free, hot and silent. She sank into a kitchen chair, allowing herself this moment of weakness. 15 years of night shifts, missed holidays, emotional exhaustion, all ended with a single piece of paper. Her phone rang, startling her. An unknown number. "Hello? Is this Sarah Matthews?" A woman's voice, professional but warm. "Yes, this is she. This is Carol, from St. Michael's Hospital. We received your application from last month." Sarah's heart clenched. She'd applied to several hospitals recently, looking for better hours to accommodate Emma's school schedule. Before today, it had seemed like a routine career move. "I'm sorry," she interrupted gently, "but I need to inform you that I'm no longer available for consideration." "Oh," Carol's surprise was evident. "Your references were excellent." "My situation has changed." The words tasted bitter. "Thank you for considering me." After hanging up, Sarah opened her laptop. Her email inbox was already filling with automated responses to jobs she'd applied for. "Thank you for your interest. We'll keep your application on file." Each one a door closing before she could even reach for the handle. A notification popped up on her screen. Her monthly bill payments were due soon. Mortgage, utilities, Emma's college prep courses, the comfortable life she'd built on a nurse's. Salary suddenly seemed precarious, built on foundations that could crumble with a single administrative decision. She opened her banking app, the numbers swimming before her eyes. Their savings would cover a few months, maybe more if they were careful, but after that, the sound of a key in the front door made her quickly wipe her eyes. Emma wasn't supposed to be home for hours. "Mom?" Her daughter's voice carried a note of concern. "The school office said you called me in sick for the rest of the day." Sarah turned to face her daughter, trying to compose her features into something resembling normalcy. But Emma had always been perceptive, too perceptive sometimes. "What's wrong?" Emma's eyes darted from the box on the counter to Sarah's face, understanding dawning in her expression. "Mom, what happened?" Sarah opened her arms, and Emma moved into them, no longer the teenage girl eager to prove her independence, but the little girl who'd once believed her mother could fix anything. "We need to talk, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, holding her daughter close. "Some things happened at work last night." Outside, the late autumn sun continued its arc across the sky, indifferent to the small dramas playing out beneath it. In hospitals across the city, nurses changed shifts, administered medications, and made countless small decisions that would ripple out into lives they'd never know. And in a quiet kitchen that suddenly felt too big and too empty, a mother and daughter held each other, facing an uncertain future together. The stack of bills on Sarah's kitchen table seemed to grow taller each day, their white envelopes gleaming accusingly in the morning light. Electric due Tuesday, mortgage due Friday, car insurance, internet, water, each one a reminder of the life she'd built and now struggled to maintain. Emma sat across from her, calculator in hand, her face pinched with concentration. At 16, she shouldn't have to worry about household finances, but here she was, helping her mother craft a survival budget. "If I drop AP biology," Emma began hesitantly. No, Sarah's response was immediate and firm. We're not touching your education. But the prep course is expensive and… Emma. Sarah reached across the table, covering her daughter's hand with her own. Your future isn't negotiable. We'll figure something out. The local news played quietly on their small kitchen TV, background noise, until a familiar name caught Sarah's attention. Richard Thompson, CEO of Thompson Healthcare Solutions, has made a remarkable recovery after suffering a severe stroke last week. Sources at Metro General Hospital credit the quick action of medical staff. Emma turned up the volume as footage showed Mr. Thompson leaving the hospital, walking steadily despite leaning slightly on his wife's arm. He looked different, conscious, more human, less the corporate titan his hospital ID photo had suggested. Mr. Thompson praises the exceptional care he received, the reporter continued, particularly noting the overnight staff who monitored his condition. When asked for comment, hospital administration stated they were proud of their dedicated medical team. Sarah's laugh held no humor. Proud of their dedicated medical team, just not proud enough to keep them employed. Mom, Emma's voice carried a warning note. She'd been watching Sarah carefully since the termination, worried about the toll it was taking. I'm fine, Sarah assured her, standing to refill her coffee cup. Third cup today, and it wasn't even noon. But coffee was cheaper than therapy. The morning mail dropped through the slot, landing with a soft thud. Emma retrieved it, sorting through the envelopes with practiced efficiency. Bill, junk. Wait, what's this? She held up a thick envelope from Emma's dream college. Sarah's heart stuttered. They'd applied for early information about pre-med programs, back when such things seemed possible. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Dear Emma Matthews, she read aloud, we are pleased to invite you to our Advanced Medical Sciences open house. Her voice trailed off. As she scanned the rest of the letter, Sarah moved behind her daughter, reading over her shoulder. The program sounded perfect, exactly what Emma had hoped for, but the listed costs made her stomach clench. Looks amazing, doesn't it? Emma's voice was carefully neutral, but Sarah could hear the longing beneath it. It does. Sarah kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. Let's keep it on the list of possibilities. Emma nodded, but they both knew what that meant. The list of possibilities was shrinking daily, dreams eroding under the steady pressure of financial reality. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another rejection email from a job application. She'd applied to every hospital within commuting distance, but her termination for policy violations was a red flag no one wanted to touch. Maybe you could try private nursing, Emma suggested, watching her mother's face fall. Or what about that clinic near the mall? Already tried, Sarah managed to smile. But don't worry, something will come up. The doorbell rang, startling them. Both. They rarely had visitors, especially mid-morning on a weekday. Sarah opened the door to find Jenny from the hospital, still in her scrubs, obviously just off shift. I hope it's okay that I stopped by, she said quickly. I wanted to tell you Mr. Thompson's been asking about you. Sarah felt Emma come up behind her, listening intently. He wanted to know who was with him that night, Jenny continued. When we told him about the night shift, he specifically asked about the nurse who stayed late. He remembers hearing voices, feeling someone holding his hand. Hospital policy prevents sharing personal information about staff, Sarah quoted bitterly. I know, but Sarah, Jenny lowered her voice. He's not just any patient. He owns hospitals. When someone like that starts asking questions, it doesn't matter. Sarah's tone was gentle but firm. What's done is done. I made my choice. After Jenny left, Emma helped her mother sort through another stack of job listings. Their morning routine had shifted since the termination. Instead of Sarah sleeping after night shift while Emma went to school, they spent their mornings together, hunting for opportunities, adjusting their budget, trying to plan for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. Look at this one, Emma said, pointing to a listing. School nurse position, you'd have the same hours as me. Sarah scanned the requirements. Must have current hospital privileges. Never mind. They worked in silence for a while, the TV still droning quietly in the background. A commercial for Thompson Healthcare Solutions came on. Their familiar slogan about healthcare with heart, seeming particularly ironic now. "Mom," Emma's voice was hesitant, "do you regret it staying that night?" Sarah looked at her daughter, really looked at her. Emma had her mother's eyes, her grandmother's determination. 3 generations of women who refused to look away when someone needed help. "No," she said finally, "some choices cost everything but save something more important. I couldn't walk away knowing he needed care, any more than I could walk away from you." Emma nodded, understanding. She'd grown up hearing stories about her grandmother, about the night that had inspired Sarah to become a nurse. Some legacies were worth more than job security. The afternoon sun slanted through their kitchen window, illuminating the pile of bills, the college brochure, the job listings. Sarah's nursing awards still hung on the wall, testament to a career built on compassion and ended for the same reason. "Maybe," Emma said thoughtfully, "sometimes losing everything is just the universe's way of making room for something better." Sarah smiled at her daughter's optimism, wishing she could share it. But as she watched Emma return to her homework, determination etched in every line of her posture, she felt a flicker of hope. They'd find a way forward. They always had. Her phone buzzed again, another news alert about Mr. Thompson's recovery. His face smiled up from the screen, healthy and whole, surrounded by his family. Worth it, she thought. Whatever comes next, it was worth it. The newspaper article sat on Richard Thompson's desk, its headline catching the morning light. "Mystery Nurse's Dedication Saves Healthcare CEO." His PR team had pushed for the story, seeing it as perfect publicity for their hospital chain. But Richard's interest went deeper than corporate image. "Still no luck finding her?" he asked his assistant, fingers tracing the article's edges. The story was frustratingly vague. Hospital policy protecting employee privacy, even former employees. "Metro. General won't release any information," Jessica replied, tablet in hand. "But we did confirm she was terminated for staying beyond her shift to monitor your condition." Richard's jaw tightened. The irony wasn't lost on him, a woman losing her job at a public hospital for saving the life of someone who owned private ones. "Keep looking," he said quietly. "Someone knows something." Across town, Sarah was folding laundry when her phone lit up with a text from Jenny. "Turn on Channel 4 now." She reached for the remote, nearly dropping it when she saw Mr. Thompson on screen, standing at a podium outside one of his hospitals. "I owe my life to a nurse who put patient care above hospital policy," he was saying, his voice strong despite his recent illness. "I'm told she was terminated for staying past her shift. To monitor my condition. I want to thank her personally and offer her a position in our healthcare system." Sarah sank onto the couch, the half-folded laundry forgotten. The camera panned to show Mrs. Thompson in the audience, nodding approvingly at her husband's words. "To the nurse who stayed with me that night," Mr. Thompson continued, "please come forward. Your dedication represents everything healthcare should be about." Emma burst through the front door, breathless from running. "Mom, did you see?" "I saw." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "You have to contact him." Emma's eyes shone with excitement. This could change everything, but Sarah shook her head. "It's not that simple, sweetheart." "Why not?" "Why not indeed?" Sarah stared at Mr. Thompson's image on the screen, remembering his unconscious form in room 742. She'd made her choice that night based on human need, not corporate opportunity. Going public now felt wrong somehow. Her phone buzzed again, Linda this time. "Sarah, he's serious about finding you. This could be your chance." The local news was picking up the story. By evening, social media was buzzing with speculation about the guardian angel nurse who'd sacrificed her career to save a CEO. Some posts praised her dedication. Others questioned whether the whole thing was a publicity stunt. Coming up at 11, the news teaser announced, the search continues for the dedicated nurse who saved Richard Thompson's life. Was she a hero or a rule breaker? Local medical professionals weigh in. Sarah turned off the TV, her hands trembling slightly. She'd wanted to help a patient, not become a media sensation. That night, as she helped Emma with her calculus homework, her daughter asked quietly, "Are you afraid?" Sarah looked up, surprised. Of what? Of things changing, of people knowing your story, of having another chance. The question hit home. Was that it? Was she hiding not from opportunity, but from hope itself? Before she could answer, her phone lit up with a new email. The sender made her heart skip. Richard.Thompson@thompsonhealth.com. Dear Sarah Matthews, it began. You may be surprised to hear from me, but I remember your voice. In my darkest hour, you were there, holding my hand, watching over me. My wife tells me you spoke to her with such kindness when she arrived that, morning, please allow me to thank you properly. Sarah closed the email without finishing it, but her finger hovered over the delete button. Through the window, she could see her reflection. Still proud, still caring, still the nurse who'd made a choice that cost everything but saved something priceless. Emma watched her mother silently. Homework, forgotten. The choice was clear in her eyes. Sometimes the biggest acts of courage aren't in the doing, but in allowing yourself to be seen for what you've done. The email waited, a digital bridge between past and future, loss and possibility. Sarah took a deep breath and began to read it again. The thank you card sat unopened on the mahogany conference table between them, Mr. Thompson's elegant handwriting visible on the envelope. Sarah's name looked strange in his careful script, too personal somehow, too real after a week of email. Exchanges and phone calls, here they were, face to face in his private office at Thompson Healthcare's headquarters. I remember your voice, he said quietly, breaking the silence. In those dark hours, when I was drifting between consciousness and shadow, your voice was my anchor. You kept saying, "Stay with me, Mr. Thompson. Your family needs you." Sarah's hands tightened around her coffee cup. Not hospital coffee in a paper cup, but fine Colombian brew in delicate china. I didn't think you could hear me. I heard everything. He smiled, the expression transforming his corporate demeanor into something warmer, more human. Including your argument with Dr. Reynolds about the mannitol dosage. You were right, by the way. Mrs. Thompson sat beside her husband, her designer. Suit a stark contrast to Sarah's simple dress, bought specially for this meeting. When Richard told me he wanted to find you, I wasn't surprised, she said. You were so kind to me that morning, even though you must have known you were in trouble. Sarah thought back to that dawn encounter. The frightened wife, the quiet reassurances. It was what anyone would have done. No, Mr. Thompson said firmly. It wasn't. We've looked into what happened that night. The subtle changes you noticed, the complications you prevented. Most nurses would have missed them, and even if they hadn't, hospital policy would have prevented them from acting. He reached for the card, sliding it across the table. Please, open it. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was not just a card, but a letter. Formal Thompson Healthcare letterhead, rich cotton paper. Dear Ms. Matthews, she read aloud, I would like to offer you the position of Director of Patient Care Initiatives at the Thompson Foundation, overseeing our new community healthcare program. She stopped, her voice catching. The salary listed was more than triple what she'd made at Metro General. We're launching a network of free clinics, Mr. Thompson explained, his voice gentle but eager. Not just basic care, but comprehensive medical services for those who can't afford them. The first one opens in your old neighborhood. Sarah looked up sharply. They'd done their research, knew about her background, her mother, the community she'd grown up in. Why me? She asked finally. You have access to hundreds of qualified administrators. Because you understand what healthcare should be, Mrs. Thompson answered. Not just procedures and policies, but real human connection. That's what saved Richard's life, and that's what we want to bring to communities that need it most, Mr. Thompson added. We're not looking for an administrator, Sarah. We're looking for someone who knows when rules matter and when humanity matters more. Sarah thought of Emma, of college applications and AP biology. She thought of her mother, of late-night bus, rides to the free clinic when they couldn't afford anything better. She thought of all the patients she'd cared for over the years, each one leaving a mark on her heart. I'd need some time, she said carefully, to think about it. Of course, Mr. Thompson smiled. But first, there's someone else who'd like to thank you. The office door opened, and a familiar face appeared. Jenny, still in her Metro General scrubs. Behind her came Linda, Dr. Reynolds, and several other nurses from her old floor. We all requested transfers, Jenny announced, grinning. To the new clinic, if you'll have us. Sarah stood overwhelmed as her former colleagues surrounded her. The thank you card fell open on the table, revealing one last line she hadn't read. Because sometimes the biggest changes start with a single act of compassion. Outside the wall of windows, the city stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, a teenager was doing calculus homework, dreaming of medical school. Somewhere, a patient was feeling alone in the dark hours before dawn. Somewhere, someone needed exactly what Sarah had to give. She picked up the card again, running her fingers over the embossed words. Sometimes, she realized, thank you was just another way of saying begin again. The foundation blueprint spread across the conference room table, its crisp blue lines mapping out more than just a building's architecture. Sarah traced the planned layout with her finger. Waiting area, examination rooms, community education, space, and something she'd insisted on. A children's play area with a volunteer homework help station. Your modifications make it feel more like a community center than a clinic, Mr. Thompson observed, studying the revised plans. That's exactly what we need. Sarah nodded, remembering long nights in sterile waiting rooms with her mother, nothing to distract from the worry and fear. Healthcare isn't just about treating symptoms, it's about creating a space where healing feels possible. The past week had been a whirlwind of transitions. Emma had cried happy tears when Sarah accepted the position, immediately starting a list of ideas for the homework help station. Maybe I could volunteer there after school, she'd suggested, her eyes bright with possibility. Mrs. Thompson, please, call me Elizabeth, entered the conference room carrying a stack of research data. The community surveys came back. You were right about the extended hours, Sarah. Most of our target demographic works multiple jobs. Traditional 9-to-5 clinic hours would miss them entirely. Sarah pulled up her draft staffing schedule on her laptop. It felt strange being on this side of healthcare administration, making the kinds of decisions that had once affected her. But this time, the policies would be built around patient needs, not corporate convenience. Jenny's already recruited 10 nurses willing to work flexible shifts, she reported. And Dr. Reynolds has connections with several medical residents interested in community health. Speaking of Dr. Reynolds, Mr. Thompson interjected, he submitted his resignation to Metro General this morning. Says he'd rather work somewhere that values patient care over paperwork. Sarah's heart warmed at the news. The team was coming together, drawn by a shared vision of what healthcare could be. Elizabeth spread out another document, demographic data for their chosen location. This neighborhood has the highest concentration of uninsured families in the city. But look at this. It also has one of the strongest community support networks. Churches, schools, local businesses, they're all eager to partner with us because they know what's at stake, Sarah said softly. She picked up a letter from the local community center, one of dozens of support messages they'd received. These aren't just statistics. They're families making impossible choices between medicine and meals. The blueprint seemed to come alive. Under their shared attention, Not just lines and measurements, but a promise taking shape. Private examination rooms designed to preserve dignity. A pharmacy program that would make medications affordable. Space for preventive care classes and health education. There's something else, Mr. Thompson said, pulling out a folder she hadn't seen before. The board approved our proposal for a medical education scholarship fund. Full rides for local students, committed to returning to serve their community. Sarah's vision blurred slightly. She thought of Emma, of other teenagers whose dreams of medical careers seemed impossible under the weight of financial reality. We'll need someone to oversee the selection committee, Elizabeth added with a knowing smile. Someone who understands both the medical field and the community's needs. Outside the conference room windows, the city sparkled in the afternoon sun. Somewhere out there, a single mother was choosing between filling a prescription and paying her electric bill. A talented teenager was setting aside medical school brochures in favor of more practical options. A nurse was bending rules to provide the care a patient needed. But change was coming, not in grand gestures or corporate mandates, but in blue lines on paper, in carefully crafted policies, in scholarships and extended hours and children's corners where homework got done while parents received care. Sarah gathered the blueprints, corners carefully, this paper foundation for real transformation. When can we break ground? The contractors are ready whenever we are, Mr. Thompson replied. But first, there's someone I'd like you to meet. The architect's waiting downstairs. I think you'll find you have a lot in common. As they headed for the elevator, Sarah caught her reflection in the glass walls. Still the same caring nurse who'd stayed late that fateful night, but now with the power to turn individual acts of compassion into systemic change. The blueprint rolled securely under her arm, not just a design for a building, but a template for hope itself. The construction plans had coffee stains and mud smudges now, their pristine lines marked with countless revisions and real-world adjustments. Sarah held them steady against the autumn wind as she walked the site with Elena Martinez, the architect whose story had struck such a chord with her own. My mother was a cleaning lady at Metro General, Eleanor explained, adjusting her hard hat. She used to tell me stories about the nurses who'd sneak her pain medication when she couldn't afford the prescription. That's why I insisted on designing the pharmacy with a private consultation area. Dignity matters as much as medicine. Sarah nodded, understanding completely. They'd spent hours discussing how every detail of the building could serve both practical and emotional needs. The waiting room would have natural light and comfortable seating arranged in small clusters rather than institutional rows. The pediatric wing would feature murals painted by local art students. Even the parking lot was designed with safety in mind, well lit and visible from the security desk. The contractor says we're ahead of schedule, Elena noted, pointing to the rising framework. Those pre-dawn inspections you insisted on are paying off. Sarah smiled, remembering Mr. Thompson's surprise when she'd requested daily 5 a.m. site visits. Old habits die hard, she told him. Some things you just can't evaluate in the daylight. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emma. Mom, got an A on my biology test. Dr. Reynolds' study tips really helped. The message warmed her heart. Her daughter had been spending afternoons at Thompson Healthcare headquarters, ostensibly doing homework, but really soaking in everything she could about medical administration. Mr. Thompson had taken to leaving medical journals on the break room table. Just in case anyone's interested, Sarah. Elizabeth Thompson's voice carried across the construction site. She picked her way carefully through the mud in shoes that probably cost more than Sarah's first car. The community center director is here with the volunteer coordination proposals. 3 women made their way to the temporary office trailer, where Reverend Jackson from the First Baptist Church waited with Pastor Chen from the local Lutheran congregation. The Interfaith Coalition had become an unexpected but vital part of their support network. We've got 20 volunteers ready to help with the children's homework program, Reverend Jackson reported proudly. Retired teachers mostly, they're already talking about expanding it to include adult education classes. And the church vans can help with transportation, Pastor Chen added. Many of our elderly congregants don't drive anymore. Sarah spread out the construction timeline on the trailer's folding table. If we stay on schedule, we can open the education space even before the medical wings are fully equipped. Get the community involved from day one. Speaking of equipment, Elizabeth interjected, Richard's meeting with the hospital suppliers today. They're interested in creating a dedicated supply line for all our future clinics. Future clinics. The words still gave Sarah a thrill. What had started as one location was already growing into a larger vision. Mr. Thompson had talked about expanding to other underserved neighborhoods, creating a network of community health centers that could transform the city's healthcare landscape. Through the trailer window, Sarah watched Emma arrive with Dr. Reynolds, both carrying stacks of paper. They'd been working on the scholarship program criteria, ensuring it would reach the students who needed it most. Your daughter's going to make an incredible doctor, Elizabeth said softly, following Sarah's gaze. Richard's already talking about creating a residency program here by the time she graduates medical school. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. 6 weeks ago, she'd been a terminated nurse with dwindling savings and fading dreams. Now she was helping build something that could change countless lives, including her daughter's. Elena rolled out a new set of drawings, details for the building's entrance. The words Thompson Matthews Community Health Center were sketched above the doors. Richard insisted, Elizabeth explained, watching Sarah's expression. He says every patient should know that this place exists because one nurse chose compassion over compliance. Outside, the autumn sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the half-built walls that would soon shelter so many hopes and healings. Sarah touched the construction plans again, feeling the rough paper under her fingers. Sometimes, the best blueprints weren't the ones on paper, but the ones written in the heart, drawn with courage and built on faith that doing the right thing would lead to the right place. The budget report glowed harshly on Sarah's laptop screen at 2 a.m., its numbers refusing to align with their goals. The construction costs had run over due to unexpected structural issues, and the high-end medical equipment Mr. Thompson insisted on wasn't getting the discount they'd hoped for. Something would have to give. You should be sleeping. Richard's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway of the temporary office, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Like her, he'd developed a habit of late-night visits to the site. So should you, she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Isn't that what your doctors recommended after the stroke? Regular sleep schedule? He smiled, settling into the chair across from her desk. Probably, but old habits die hard. Besides, Elizabeth says I sleep better knowing someone else is watching over things. Sarah minimized the budget spreadsheet, but not before Richard caught a glimpse. That bad? We're over by about 12%, she admitted. The foundation reinforcement alone. Forget the numbers for a minute, he interrupted. Tell me what's really keeping you up. Sarah stood, moving to the window that overlooked the nearly completed building. Its dark shape rose against the city skyline, both familiar and daunting. We promised these people something different. Not just another underfunded clinic with good intentions, but real, comprehensive care. If we start cutting corners now... Who said anything about cutting corners? Richard, the numbers don't lie. Unless we reduce the scope stays. His voice held the same quiet certainty she remembered from their first meeting. I'll talk to the board about additional funding tomorrow. The board's already nervous about the project's scale. Elizabeth told me some members are questioning the whole model. Richard joined her at the window. You know what I remember most about that night? Not the pain, not the fear, but the absolute certainty in your voice when you told me to hold on. You didn't hedge or qualify or worry about protocols. You just did what needed to be done. That was different, Sarah protested. That was one patient, one night. This is the same thing on a larger scale. One community, one chance to do it right. A security guard passed below, flashlight beam sweeping across the construction site. Sarah watched its progress, remembering. Other late nights, other moments of doubt. Jenny called today, she said finally. 3 more nurses from Metro General want to join the team, but with the budget constraints, hire them. Richard, hire them, he repeated firmly. And then, help me convince the board why we need them. You've got something they don't have, Sarah. You've been on both sides. You know what it means to make decisions in the dark and justify them in the daylight. Sarah thought of the nurses who'd followed her here, of Emma's growing confidence, as she helped plan the student programs, of Elena's mother, who'd once needed secret kindness to access basic care. The pharmacy program alone will cost less than 1 wing of my newest private hospital, Richard finished. I've built monuments to corporate healthcare all over this city. Maybe it's time to build something that matters more. Sarah's phone lit up with a text from Elizabeth. Don't let him stay too late, but while you're both being stubborn, check your email. I think I found a solution for the equipment issue, Richard laughed. She knows us too well. Sarah opened her laptop again, this time pulling up Elizabeth's email. A major medical supplier was offering a partnership deal, discounted equipment, in exchange for being part of the clinic's innovative model. See, Richard said softly. Sometimes when you hold your ground, the ground rises to meet you. Dawn was breaking over the city as they finally left the site. The building's skeleton had taken on flesh, walls, windows, rooms waiting to be filled, with hope and healing. Sarah paused at her car, looking back at what they'd created. We're really doing this, aren't we? Richard nodded, his face tired but peaceful, thanks to one nurse who wouldn't give up on a difficult patient. I think that patient might have saved me too, Sarah replied quietly. Above them the sky lightened to pearl, then rose, then brilliant morning gold. The budget report waited on her laptop, its challenges still unsolved, but somehow less daunting. Sometimes the biggest dreams required the biggest leaps of faith and the strongest coffee. The grand opening invitation gleamed gold against cream cardstock, but it wasn't the elegant typography that made Sarah's hands tremble as she held it. It was the simple line at the bottom, the Thompson Matthews Community Health Center, where compassion meets care. In a few hours, these words would become reality. Mom, Emma stood in the doorway of their new office, already wearing her volunteer coordinator badge. The news vans are starting to arrive, and Mrs. Peterson from Next. Dor is here. She brought enough coffee and homemade muffins to feed an army. Sarah smiled, remembering the elderly neighbor who'd watched the construction progress daily from her porch, offering encouraging words and occasional criticism of the landscaping choices. The community had adopted the clinic long before its doors officially opened. Is everything ready in the children's area? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Emma had spent weeks perfecting the homework help station, stocking it with textbooks and creating study guides. Dr. Reynolds is setting up the last of the medical diagrams, Emma replied. He says they're much better than the ones he used in med school. Her voice held a hint of pride. She'd helped design the educational displays. The morning sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the careful blend of professional and welcoming that Elena had achieved in the design. The waiting area looked more like a comfortable living room than a medical facility, with soft lighting and artwork from local students. The check-in desk was low and open, designed to facilitate conversation rather than create barriers. Sarah, Elizabeth appeared, immaculate in a suit that somehow managed to look both expensive and approachable. Richard's on his way with the board members, and you might want to see who else is here. Curious, Sarah followed Elizabeth to the entrance. Through the glass doors, she saw Jenny leading a group of familiar faces, nurses, orderlies, and support. Staff from Metro General, all coming to support their former colleague. They took personal days to be here, Elizabeth explained softly. Even Margaret Chen came. Sarah's breath caught. The administrator who had fired her stood at the edge of the group, looking somewhat uncertain but determined. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. Dr. Reynolds directed the medical staff in final equipment checks. Pastor Chen and Reverend Jackson arranged chairs for the ceremony. Local reporters set up their cameras, eager to document the unusual partnership between a healthcare CEO and the nurse who'd once broken rules to save his life. 5 minutes, Elena called out, herding people into position. She'd insisted on overseeing the ceremony logistics with the same attention to detail she'd given the building's design. Richard arrived with the board members, but instead of joining them, he made his way to Sarah. Ready? She nodded, unable to speak. Through the glass doors, she could see the crowd gathering, community members, medical professionals, families who would soon trust this place with their care. Sarah? Emma touched her arm. Look who's here. In the front row, supported by Jenny on one side and Linda on the other, sat Mrs. Peterson from Metro General's room 742, the patient whose insurance paperwork had led to Sarah's first policy violation. She'd brought her daughter, the one who'd been so confused and frightened that night. The doors opened. People filed in. Speeches were made about healthcare innovation and community partnership. But for Sarah, the real ceremony happened in the quiet moments between words. Emma helping an elderly man find his seat, Dr. Reynolds showing a wide-eyed teenager the medical displays, Margaret Chen quietly asking Jenny about volunteer opportunities. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she looked down at her prepared remarks, but found she didn't need them. 20 years ago, she began, I lost my mother because she couldn't access the care she needed. Today, we're opening doors that will never close on anyone in need. But this isn't just about medical care. It's about dignity, respect, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to heal. The ribbon cutting was supposed to be ceremonial, but as Sarah and Richard held the scissors together, she felt the weight of real transformation in their hands. The ribbon fell, applause erupted, and Emma, her eyes shining with tears and dreams, was the first to walk through the doors of the Thompson Matthews Community Health Center. Outside, the invitation's gold lettering caught the morning light. A.T. Promise made manifest in brick and compassion and second chances. The map on the conference room wall was dotted with colored pins, each representing a future clinic location. Sarah stood before it, marker in hand, adding notes from their latest community assessment. Red pins for immediate needs, blue for midterm goals, green for long-term vision. 3 months after opening their first center, and already the map looked like a constellation of hope spreading across the city. The Riverside location makes sense for Phase 2, Elizabeth said, studying the demographic data spread across the table. Similar population profile to our current site, and they've already got a strong community support network. And an empty recreation center that could be renovated, Richard added. He looked healthier than ever, energized by their success. Elena's preliminary sketches show real potential. Sarah circled another neighborhood on the map. We're getting requests from the medical community too. 3 more doctors from Metro General want to join our rotation system. The innovative staffing model they'd developed was drawing attention from healthcare professionals across the city. Instead of building separate teams for each location, they created a rotating network of medical staff who could move between centers, sharing expertise and maintaining consistency of care. Speaking of Metro General, Elizabeth smiled, sliding a newspaper across the table. Have you seen this? Sarah picked up the paper, her eyes catching the headline, Public Hospital Revises Policies After Community Clinic Success. Below was a photo of Margaret Chen announcing new guidelines for staff overtime and patient care decisions. Sometimes the biggest changes start from the outside, Richard observed quietly. A knock at the door interrupted them. Emma entered, followed by Jenny and a teenage boy, Sarah, recognized from the homework help program. Mom, can we show you something? They pulled up a presentation on the conference room screen, graphs and charts documenting the impact of their educational support services. Test scores rising, school attendance improving, health outcomes correlating with academic support. Marcus did the statistical analysis, Emma said proudly, nodding to the teenage boy. He's thinking about biostatistics as a career now. Sarah watched the young man explain his methodology with growing confidence. This was an unexpected ripple effect of their work, inspiring the next generation not just through scholarships, but through direct involvement in healthcare innovation. The university's interested in partnering with us, Jenny added. They want to create a community health research program based on our model. Richard studied the presentation with obvious interest. We could expand the scholarship program, create internship opportunities. Already working on it, Elizabeth interjected. The board approved additional funding this morning. They're calling it the Matthews-Thompson Healthcare Leadership Initiative. Sarah's throat tightened. She turned back to the map, using the moment to compose herself. Each pin represented not just a future building, but a community's worth of stories, hopes, and healings. Dr. Reynolds sent over the latest patient satisfaction surveys, Emma continued, pulling up another screen. 98% positive. Responses, with most citing the human touch as what sets us apart. The human touch. Sarah thought of her night in room 742, of holding a stranger's hand in the dark hours before dawn. Sometimes the smallest gestures created the largest waves. There's something else, Richard said, exchanging glances with Elizabeth. The American Healthcare Association wants to feature our model in their next conference. They're calling it a paradigm shift in community medicine. Sarah shook her head, smiling. They're making it sound more complicated than it is. All we did was remember that healthcare is about people first. All you did, Elizabeth corrected gently, was show us what that really means. Through the windows, they could see the original clinic, its windows warm with light despite the early evening hour. The homework help center was full of students. The community education room hosted a prenatal care class. Dr. Reynolds was probably still in his office, mentoring new residents in the art of patient-centered care. Sarah added another pin to the map, this one yellow, marking where they'd received the latest request for partnership. The constellation grew, each point of light representing lives touched, systems changed, hope restored. Ready for the next phase? Richard asked, watching her. Sarah thought of that night 3 months ago, of choosing compassion over compliance. Every pin on this map was an echo of that choice, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing wasn't the action itself, but being willing to let that action grow into something larger than yourself. Ready, she answered, and began to draw the future. The emergency protocol binder lay open on the clinic's front desk, its pages pristine from lack of use, until tonight. Sarah's fingers moved swiftly through the sections they'd prepared but never tested. Mass casualty incident, all hands response. Community emergency coordination, factory explosion at Miller Industrial, Jenny reported. Phone pressed to her ear. Metro General's overwhelmed. They're asking if we can take overflow. Sarah glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. The clinic normally closed at 8 Sue, but she'd been working late with Richard on expansion plans when the first alerts came through. How many incoming? She asked, already reaching for the emergency staff. Your call list. At least 20, mostly burns and smoke inhalation, some critical. Sarah's mind raced. They had the equipment, the supplies, the space, but they'd never handled anything of this scale. This wasn't a standard night at a community clinic. This was the kind of crisis that tested even major hospitals. Call everyone, she decided. Full emergency protocol activation. The next 30 minutes were a blur of preparation. Dr. Reynolds arrived first, still in his dinner clothes. Elizabeth Thompson came with him, immediately taking charge of logistics. Emma, who'd been studying at a friend's house nearby, ran in carrying extra blankets from home. I called Pastor Chen, she reported. The church is sending volunteers to help with family support. Richard arrived as the first ambulances approached, their sirens cutting through the night. I've got the board's emergency authorization, said. Whatever you need, whatever it costs, just do it. Sarah nodded, already moving toward the entrance. The protocols they'd written seemed to come alive in her hands. triage stations established, treatment areas designated, staff assignments clear. This was what they'd built this place for, not just for routine care, but for moments when the community needed them most. The first patients arrived in waves of smoke smell and pain. Factory workers, security guards, cleaning staff, the night shift caught in catastrophe. Sarah moved between them with practiced efficiency, her old emergency nursing skills flooding back. "Primary burn units full at Metro," Jenny called out. "They're sending 3 more critical cases." Sarah looked around their transformed clinic. Dr. Reynolds directed treatment in what was usually the education room. Elizabeth coordinated with emergency services from the front desk. Emma and Marcus helped Pastor Chen's volunteers track family members and provide updates. A familiar face appeared in the doorway. Margaret Chen from Metro General, still in her administrator's suit. Despite the late hour, "We heard you were taking overflow," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "Need another set of hands?" Sarah handed her a set of scrubs. "Welcome to the team." The night stretched on. Some cases were straightforward. Minor burns, smoke exposure, cuts from broken glass. Others tested the limits of their facility and their nerve. Sarah found herself working alongside her old Metro General colleagues as if the past had never happened, all of them focused solely on the needs before them. Around 3 a.m., Richard appeared at her elbow with coffee. "How are we holding up?" Sarah surveyed the organized chaos around them. Every room was full, every staff member engaged, but the system was working. Their protocols, born from compassion and shaped by experience, were proving their worth. "We're doing it," she said softly. "We're really doing it." "Of course we are," he replied. "This is what you built this place for, what you've always done, taking care of people who need help, no matter what it takes." A commotion at the entrance drew their attention. Another critical patient arriving, but this time Sarah recognized him, the factory's night supervisor, the one who'd stayed behind to make sure everyone else got out. As they worked to stabilize him, Sarah caught glimpses of the scene around. Her, Margaret Chen comforting a frightened family member, Emma efficiently managing supply distribution, Elizabeth coordinating with emergency services, Dr. Reynolds calmly teaching a young volunteer how to properly dress a burn. The emergency protocol binder sat forgotten on the desk, its theoretical guidelines transformed into living action. They'd planned for this moment, but the real strength wasn't in the written procedures. It was in the people who'd chosen to build something different, something that could bend without breaking, expand without losing its heart. Dawn broke over the city, painting the clinic windows in soft light. The crisis wasn't over, but its peak had passed. They'd faced their first real test, not as a community clinic playing at being a hospital, but as exactly what they'd set out to be, a place where compassion met capability, where rules served healing, rather than hindered it. Sarah caught Richard's eye across the room. He nodded slightly, understanding in his face. Sometimes the biggest dreams didn't show their true worth until the darkest hours, when theory met reality and humanity rose to meet the moment. The award certificate hung in the clinic's entrance, its elegant calligraphy catching the morning light. For outstanding innovation in community healthcare, presented to the Thompson Matthews Community Health Center, but it was the smaller text below that made Sarah pause each time she passed, in recognition of their exemplary response during the Miller industrial crisis, demonstrating that community healthcare can rise to any challenge when compassion meets capability. "They got it right, you know," Richard said, joining her at the entrance. "That night proved everything we've been trying to show them." A month had passed since the factory explosion, but its impact continued to ripple through the healthcare community. What could have been a tragedy had instead become a case study in emergency response and community collaboration. "The Journal of Emergency Medicine wants to publish our protocol," Dr. Reynolds announced, arriving with his morning coffee. "They're calling it the Matthews Model. Flexible emergency response built on community integration." Sarah shook her head still uncomfortable with the attention. It wasn't just the protocol, it was everyone coming together, the staff, the volunteers, even Metro General. That's exactly what makes it revolutionary, Elizabeth interjected, joining their morning gathering. We've proved that healthcare doesn't have to choose between professional excellence and community connection. We can have both. Through the windows, Sarah watched Emma giving a tour to a group of medical students. Her daughter moved through the clinic with natural confidence now, explaining not just the facility's features, but its philosophy. "Mom!" Emma called out, bringing the group to the entrance. "These students want to hear about the night of the explosion." The medical students looked at Sarah with barely concealed awe. She recognized their expressions, the same idealistic hope she'd once felt, tempered now by stories of bureaucracy and burnout. "What we did that night wasn't magic," she told them. "We just removed the barriers between good people and good medicine. Sometimes that's all it takes." "But how did you know it would work?" one student asked. "Taking on that many emergency cases in a community clinic setting, we didn't know," Richard answered for her. "We just knew we had to try. Sometimes the most important credential is the courage to care." The award ceremony last week had been full of similar questions. Healthcare administrators from across the country wanted to understand their model. How had a community clinic managed to handle a mass casualty event so effectively? How had they integrated professional staff with community volunteers? How had they coordinated so seamlessly with traditional hospitals? "The governor's office called again," Elizabeth mentioned casually. "They want to use our model as a template for statewide healthcare reform." Sarah thought of that night in room 742, of breaking rules to save one life. Now here they were, changing rules to save many. "The scholarship committee meets this afternoon," Emma reminded them. "Marcus is presenting his research on community health outcomes, and—" she hesitated, eyes shining. "I got my early acceptance letter from medical school." The news brought a fresh wave of congratulatory hugs. Emma's acceptance wasn't just a personal victory. It was proof that their vision could nurture the next generation of healthcare providers. "Dr. Matthews," Richard mused, "has a nice ring to it." "Speaking of doctors," Elizabeth added, "Margaret Chen is retiring from Metro General. She's asked to join our board of directors." Sarah smiled at the irony. The administrator who had once fired her would now help guide the institution born from that dismissal. A commotion at the front desk drew their attention. Jenny was welcoming the first patients of the day, a young mother with 2 children, an elderly man with his daughter, a teenager coming for the homework help program. The ordinary miracles of daily healthcare happening in an extraordinary setting. The award certificate caught the light again, but Sarah's eyes were drawn to the family photos now decorating the walls around it. Factory workers reunited with their loved ones, emergency responders posing with clinic staff, community volunteers serving late-night coffee to tired nurses. The real recognition wasn't in the fancy calligraphy or official ceremonies. It was in the lives touched and the barriers broken, ready for the next challenge. Richard asked, watching her expression. Sarah looked around at what they'd built, not just a clinic, but a revolution in caring. The award was nice, but the real achievement was in creating a place where compassion wasn't just allowed, but expected. Where rules served people, not the other way around. "Always," she answered, and stepped forward into another day of possibility. The partnership agreement lay between them on Richard's desk, its formal language outlining something far more personal than mere business arrangements. Co-Director of Healthcare Innovation, the title read. But Sarah's eyes kept returning to the handwritten note in the margin, because some partnerships are meant to be permanent. "You've basically been doing the job already," Richard said softly, watching her read. "This just makes it official. Equal partners in everything we build from here." Sarah touched the paper gently, remembering other documents that had changed. Her life, a termination notice, a thank you card, an award certificate. But this one felt different, more intimate somehow. Everything? She asked, meeting his eyes. Everything. He moved around the desk, taking her hand. Sarah, you know this. Isn't just about the clinics anymore. Hasn't been for a while. The evening sun painted his office in warm gold, so different from the harsh fluorescent lights of room 742 where their story had begun. Elizabeth had known, of course, had probably known before either of them did. She'd been the one who suggested Richard take Sarah to dinner to discuss expansion plans, who arranged working late nights that somehow turned into long conversations about life and purpose and second chances. What will people say? Sarah wondered aloud. The nurse who got fired for helping a patient, now running his healthcare empire. They'll say it makes perfect sense, Richard smiled. The patient who learned what healthcare should be, partnering with the nurse who showed him. A knock at the door interrupted them. Emma stuck her head in, then grinned at their clasped hands. Finally, sorry, but Mom, you need to see this. They followed her to the clinic's education room, now filled with familiar faces. Jenny, Dr. Reynolds, Eleanor, Margaret Chen, Pastor Chen, Marcus, and dozens of others, all wearing knowing smiles. We couldn't wait, Elizabeth explained, stepping forward. The State Healthcare Commission approved our proposal. Full funding for 10 new clinics, with our model as the template. Sarah's hand tightened in Richard's as she absorbed the news. 10 new clinics, 10 more communities transformed, 10 more chances to prove that compassion and capability could coexist. But that's not all, Emma burst out, unable to contain her excitement. Show them the letter. Elizabeth produced an official envelope bearing the seal of the National Healthcare Innovation Board. They want to establish a teaching program. Medical students will rotate through our clinics, learning not just procedures but philosophy. They're calling it humanitarian healthcare, which means, Richard added, we'll need strong leadership, partners who understand both the medical and human sides of healing. Partners who aren't afraid to rewrite the rules when the rules stop serving people. Sarah looked around the room at the faces that had become family. Jenny, who'd followed her into uncertainty. Dr. Reynolds, who'd trusted her intuition that crucial night. Eleanor, who'd designed spaces that healed through beauty as well as function. Margaret, who'd learned to value heart above protocol. Elizabeth, who'd helped orchestrate not just professional success, but personal happiness, and Emma, her brilliant, compassionate daughter, who would carry their vision into the next generation of medicine. Partners, she said softly, turning back to Richard, in everything. He drew her closer, professional decorum giving way to personal truth. In everything. The room erupted in cheers and congratulations, though Sarah suspected they weren't just celebrating the partnership agreement. Emma hugged them both, whispering about time in her mother's ear. Later, as the impromptu celebration wound down, Sarah found herself back in Richard's office, looking at the document that would cement their professional and personal futures. Having second thoughts? He asked, joining her. Remembering first ones, she corrected. That night in 742, choosing between rules and compassion. I never imagined where that choice would lead. I did, he smiled. Well, not consciously. I was pretty out of it. But somewhere in that darkness, I heard your voice and knew I was in the hands of someone who understood what really matters. Sarah picked up the pen, her signature flowing smoothly across the partnership agreement. More than a business document, more than a career move. This was a declaration that some rules were meant to be broken, some chances were meant to be taken, and some nights of courage were meant to lead to mornings of joy. Ready to change healthcare forever? Richard asked, adding his own signature. Sarah looked at their names side by side, at the future they would build together. Ready for everything, she answered, and meant it with all her heart. The impact report's graphs and statistics told a story bigger than numbers. 1 year of humanitarian healthcare. Sarah studied the data during a quiet moment in what had once been room 742 at Metro General, now transformed into the hospital's first community care wing. 50,000 patients served, she read aloud. 8 new clinics opened, 300 medical students trained in the Matthews model, 87% reduction in emergency room visits for preventable conditions. "Don't forget the best statistic," Emma said, adjusting her white coat. Her medical school rotations had brought her full circle, back to where her mother's story began. 0 patients turned away for inability to pay. Sarah touched the reports. The cover, remembering other documents that had marked their journey. But this one felt different, not just a record of what they'd done, but a blueprint for what was possible. "Dr. Matthews," a nurse called from the hallway. "Your student group is here for rounds." Emma straightened, still getting used to the title. Even as a medical student, she'd already become known for teaching others about the principles that had transformed healthcare in their city. "Coming!" She hugged her mother quickly. "See you at the board meeting later?" Sarah nodded, watching. Her daughter stride confidently down the hall. Emma moved through the hospital with the same purpose that had once driven Sarah to stay late that fateful night. The determination to put people before protocols. "She's going to revolutionize medical education," Richard said, joining Sarah. By the window, their recent marriage had surprised no one. Their continued partnership in healthcare innovation had inspired many. "She already is," Elizabeth added, arriving with fresh data. 3 more medical schools have requested our curriculum. They're calling it the Matthews-Thompson approach to humanitarian healthcare. Sarah smiled at the name. "I still think it should be called the Room 742 Protocol, where it all started." "Speaking of starts," Richard said, "the governor signed the bill this morning. Every hospital in the state will be required to establish community care partnerships based on our model." The implications were staggering. What had begun as one nurse's choice to stay with one patient had grown into a movement that was reshaping the very foundation of healthcare delivery. Through the window, Sarah could see their original clinic, its lights warm against the evening sky. Pastor Chen's van was parked outside, probably delivering elderly patients to the evening diabetes management class. Marcus, now pre-med himself, would be running the homework help program, inspiring another generation of potential healthcare. "And providers, the numbers don't tell the whole story," she said softly, touching the impact report again. "They can't measure the hope we've restored, the dignity we've protected, the futures we've changed." "No," Richard agreed, "but they can show others it's possible. That compassion and capability aren't opposing forces, that sometimes the best medicine isn't in a procedure, but in a presence." Margaret Chen appeared in the doorway, now a full-time advocate for community healthcare integration. "The new residents are asking for you both. They want to hear the Room 742 story again." Sarah exchanged glances with Richard. They'd told their story countless times now, to medical conferences, policymakers, healthcare executives. But the most important tellings were always to the young doctors and nurses who needed to believe that one person's commitment to caring could change everything. "Tell them we'll be right there," Richard said. "Some stories need to be passed on." As they walked through the halls of Metro General, Sarah noticed the changes their influence had brought: lower nurse-to-patient ratios, comfortable family waiting areas, integrated community services. The hospital's mission statement had been rewritten. "Where compassion meets care," now headed every document. The impact report tucked under her arm felt lighter now. Its statistics transformed into faces and stories, and lives changed. Jenny running the nurse training program, Dr. Reynolds mentoring new physicians in patient-centered care, Elena designing healing spaces across the city, each of them carrying forward the lesson learned in Room 742, that rules were meant to serve people, not restrict compassion, ready to inspire some more future healthcare revolutionaries. Richard asked as they approached the teaching amphitheater. Sarah thought of that night 1 year ago, of choices made in darkness that had led to so much light, of one small act of defiance that had grown into a movement, of a termination that had become a transformation. "Always," she answered, and together they stepped forward to share their story once again, knowing that each telling planted seeds of change in hearts ready to grow them. The new hospital ID badge caught the morning light as Sarah pinned it to her blazer. Sarah Matthews Thompson, Executive Director of Humanitarian Healthcare, Metro General Hospital. Standing in front of the building where she'd once been terminated, she felt the weight of the journey that had brought her back, not as a rule breaker, but as a rule maker. "Ready for your first day?" Richard asked, squeezing her hand. Again? The hospital's main entrance had been redesigned according to Elena's principles: warm lighting, comfortable seating, and a prominent sign reading, "Where compassion meets care." Through the doors, Sarah could see Emma in her white coat, leading morning rounds with a group of medical students. "Mom!" Emma called out, waving them over. "Perfect timing! I was just telling the students about room 742. The young faces turned towards Sarah with recognition. Her story had become part of their curriculum, the night that changed not just one hospital, but healthcare itself. "Dr. Matthews," one student ventured, "how did you know it would work out, taking that risk?" Sarah touched her new badge, remembering. The old one she'd surrendered in the conference room that morning long ago. "I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't walk away. Sometimes that's all you need to know." Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the bustling lobby. Jenny coordinated with community volunteers at the welcome desk. Dr. Reynolds discussed cases with residents in the new teaching corner. Margaret Chen led a tour of healthcare administrators from another state, explaining their integrated care model. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, Richard reminded her gently. "Time to present your vision for the next phase." Sarah nodded, but paused for one moment more. Through the windows, she could see their network of community clinics spreading across the city, each one a testament to what happens when compassion meets opportunity, when rules serve healing rather than hinder it. A young nurse hurried past, then stopped and turned back. "Mrs. Matthews Thompson, I just wanted to say, your story is why I became a nurse, to know that one person's choice to care could change so much." Sarah smiled, recognizing in the young woman's eyes the same fire that had driven her own choices. "Just remember, every night shift, every patient, every moment of care carries the possibility of transformation. We never know which choice will be the one that changes everything." As she and Richard walked toward the boardroom, Sarah felt the presence of all those who had been part of their journey, the patients, the colleagues, the community members who had believed in their vision. Her new ID badge represented more than a position. It was a symbol of healthcare's evolution towards something more human, more compassionate, more possible. "Full circle," Richard murmured, understanding her thoughts. Sarah touched her badge one more time, feeling its smooth surface under her fingers. Not just full circle, she thought, but an ever-widening spiral of change, beginning in room 742 and reaching out toward a future where compassion and care would always go hand in hand. "Full circle," she agreed, "and just beginning."